What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now. I'm Alex, and in this video, I want to talk about why I think Infamous really needs a remaster/remake. Look, we just celebrated the 15-year anniversary yesterday. Tomorrow, I'm actually going to have a very, very big video on Podcast Now Back to the Past. If you haven't checked it out, link will be in the description, where I go through, my thoughts replaying Infamous, and I'm going to be celebrating Infamous the entire week, basically, on these channels. But for this channel and this video, one of the things I recognized and realized as I was replaying this game that I want to bring here is the game sorely needs an update. And this might be a hot take. This might be too controversial for some, so I'm sorry about this. But the game, in terms of the technicalities, are not nearly as good as you might remember them being. Now, I have some hot takes on the game just in general. You have to wait for tomorrow's video for me to say it, but let's just talk kind of about the performance, because I think that is the most glaring issue that Infamous has 15 years later, and I think also where it's kind of trapped, right? Like, all those things play a part, but really, replaying it, the number one thing I left with is saying when they do bring this back, if they bring this back, you have got to do a remake remaster, because the game, in terms of that technical side, does not hold up anymore. In fact, it's pretty alarming how bad it can get at times. So the thing I really want to focus on is the frame rate. Now look, honestly, I'm not a huge frame rate guy. Really, like the 60 versus 30, I've tried to understand it from the people, the people of the internet, but I've never really been too much of a frame rate guy myself. As long as it doesn't break in front of me and I can't notice when it just severely gets cut in half, as long as that doesn't happen, I'm really not a frame rate guy. Infamous has a huge problem when you're throwing your grenades, which are still fun to do, when you're blasting, when you're doing your kind of pulse shield thing, when you're doing anything, okay? It all looks good, it feels good, but sometimes if they put more enemies, if they put too many, if they put maybe 10 or 12, or, there's some missions where it's kind of like a war that's going on, you have to jump in and, fight between them. If there's too many enemies on the screen, the game crawls to basically a full-on stop. The frame rates completely die, and honestly, that is where this game, it becomes not fun. It really starts to break down, where it's the game can't handle it. The game cannot handle anything that you're doing in it, and this doesn't happen once or twice. No. This happens all the time. This could happen when you're riding the train tracks, which is, again, really cool to do, and you got the cool little posture thing, but the game just cannot handle it. Now, look, I played it on the PS3. I have the original, 2009 over here. And so I'm not doing the cloud thing through PlayStation. Although, again, if we're talking about, okay, well, what other reasons are there why it needs a remaster remake? Well, some of them, we have tackled them before, right? The thing I always say with Infamous is they're scattered. All of them are scattered. Even Prototype, which is, a franchise that only has 2 games, and one of them I think is really good, one of them I think is really bad. Prototype is together. Now, it's together in a very lazy port that I'm not a big fan of, but it is together when you can play them and you can buy it and all that jazz. For Infamous, you have 1, you have 2, you have Festival of Blood, and that is a collection. In fact, I have it. I have Infamous 1 separate, 2 separate, and then I do have the collection of both of them. So I'm trying to basically get everything under the sun physically, right? So they do have that. But then you have Second Son and First Light, which are separated. So none of these games, which it's a franchise. It's a franchise with only, what do you want to say? It's really got 3 base games. Festival of Blood is phenomenal. Okay, I'm not here to diss that game. Festival of Blood is really great, but you really have 1, 2, Second Son, and then you have, kind of 2 really big glorified DLCs that are basically standalone games on their own. So you have 3 or you have 5, depending on how you look at it, and they're not all together. And this isn't all that uncommon like you think of, and you think of the PS3 era specifically, right? Because you can think of God of War collections, they're not all together. Sly was all together with 1 through 3, but then they did 4 and they never combined those. Jak and Daxter, it is hard to find a collection that has every single game together, right? Except, I guess if you go Kingdom Hearts, but even Kingdom Hearts has multiple collections because there's so many games, right? But Infamous, again, the thing I would say negative about it is there's not too many games. It shouldn't actually be all that difficult to put them together. So I guess what I'm trying to get at here, right, is I think as a collective, we need to get all these games in one go, in one package, right? That's one thing I've always wanted. If you're talking specifically, though, about Infamous 1, I mean, I'm not looking for a port situation here, right? Like, I think the game needs a full-on remake. Now, to focus on a little bit more of the positives, though, of the game, like, the game is still good. I'm not saying the game is, like, terrible, the game is bad. I really feel like the game, in a lot of ways, can still hold up. And I also feel like a remake would do such wonders to it, because I really think it's a pretty cool city. It's pretty cool enemies. It's pretty cool powers. It's still a cool story, and it's still cool choices you make. And I feel like it just needs a little patchwork, right? Like, again, some of the things really hold up. I think the parkouring holds up. It just needs a little bit of textures. It needs a little bit of lighting. It needs a little bit of the frame rate kind of boosting where it doesn't fall apart on you. Like, there's definitely a good game, like, buried within. And I think a remake, I mean, if you want to do a remaster, do a remaster. But this is something that, by the way, let me just stop myself right here. Do I think we'll ever get a remake, remaster of Infamous 1? Man, the odds, I think, are low. Honestly, the odds are low. There was a thing, actually, for Resistance on Twitter a day or two ago where somebody asked Insomniac, like, hey, it would be really great, even if you could just port them. Even if you could port them to PS5 or PC, put Resistance, out. And Insomniac responded and said, like, that would be awesome, and, we would love to do it, but all hands on deck for Wolverine. It really, okay, like, I want Wolverine, but it really just, I think, highlights, again, another issue of the gaming industry we've talked so much about. I just don't think you're ever going to get that kind of care to the old games. So specifically with Infamous, right, and Sucker Punch, for that, it's like, okay, well, the best you could probably get is some sort of and I don't want to call all ports lazy, but if you're literally just porting it over, it is the laziest thing you could do. So I don't just want that, because if you move Infamous 1 over, again, I think Infamous 1, in terms of the technical side, doesn't hold up at all. I really think it needs help there, and I don't really think you should just let it die. Maybe it goes back to that fundamental point or a thought that I've always had. Infamous is such a strong franchise, and I think it could still do stuff now. I think the old games are still good. Infamous 2 is a phenomenal, and that game, I think, holds up kind of all the way around, but Infamous is just such a great franchise that, not only does it deserve to be brought back, but, like, if you're going to do these remakes, remasters, and I know Sony is, Sony's so focused on The Last of Us and Horizon doing everything with those, but, like, Infamous 1, if you did a remake of Infamous 1, let me tell you something, I think it would do quite good, okay? I really do, because I think so many people do have fond memories with it, and I think it needs help. And I think if you were to do it, Infamous 1 is still a good game. I think you would actually sell pretty well. And as we've found out, and, as we keep saying in all these videos, there's been, the data kind of analysis of when Sony, even specifically Sony, right? When these guys do these remakes and remasters, it takes less money. It takes less time to do it, and they actually normally sell pretty good, and they tend to make their money back because it's not as expensive to make. So doing an Infamous 1 remake is kind of like cost effective. It's not going to be all that bad. And then you stand a pretty good chance of at least making the money back where you don't lose any. You don't lose anything. You don't have the potential to lose like $50 million. Even, say if a game costs $200 million to make and you only make like 180, you actually lost money even though you made so much, you spent so much. You wouldn't have that issue, I think, with a remake or remaster of Infamous 1, right? But at the end of the day, truly, like, it would be nice to remake it for like everything, but just to remaster it for the frame rate and just like that kind of performance side of things, that is what I would want. So if we're having to debate and saying, well, which one makes the most sense or which one would they kind of have to do, I actually think a remaster is what would be the bare minimum. A remake, I think, would just be really cool because you could touch up kind of everything, you know what I mean? Eliminate some of the jank. There is some like weird jankiness when you go up to NPCs. They give you side quests and they're doing really weird things with their body. Like that happens maybe 75% of the time. So it doesn't take you out completely, but it's like, okay, this is definitely like 2009 jank, right, where it doesn't really need to be there. That would be fixed, I think, with a remake, but I'm not going to ask for too much, okay? So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Happy 15th birthday to Infamous. Again, we will be celebrating all week long. Make sure, as always, you're subscribed to the channel, bell icon turned on, and I hope to see you all on the next one.